So, how do you actually balance encounters that are difficult or deadly without wiping out a party? Well, part of this comes into what we think of an encounter and the way that Dungeons and Dragons mechanics are designed. So, first things first, we are going to be talking about how to use waves today in order to do that. So that way, you as the dungeon master have a tool that can actually help you balance the encounters without killing it. This is called live balancing, balancing an encounter on the fly depending on how well your party's doing. But there's something we have to understand. Number one, the adventuring day in Dungeons and Dragons. Now, this is a mechanic that was developed to use the resources of that party throughout the day. So that way you could actually plan a certain amount of medium encounters and a certain amount of deadly encounters to allow you to create an intense moment. Now, the adventuring day comes from the old time basis of there was an adventuring day to where we would go out towards the dungeon. We would then delve in the dungeon, then come back. And that adventuring day would lead us to short and long rests, utilizing our resources along the way. And that's how the dungeon master could balance the game mechanics. We aren't talking about realism. We're not talking about thematics. We're not talking about how your game feels. This is purely a balancing mechanic to allow you to be able to make combat feel either deadly or easy for your party. Since that inception of the game, since it was created, the idea of the adventuring day has changed dramatically for us. So now the adventuring day starts with, well, we don't have one anymore. What we do have is scenes, meaning in Dungeons and Dragons, people are playing a much more narrative game than the way that it was originally designed. Combat used to be a core pillar of the game. Now, we see combat that's much more developed. Now, this could be from the Matt Mercer effect. It could be from all the comments we have online. It could be from just the overall growth of the game or how many people are coming in wanting a more thematic experience. Every table is different, but the mechanics of Dungeons and Dragons, unless you homebrew the living daylights out of it, are still able to have those thematic encounters with the way that you want to run your game. That's done through just simply changing how you think about an encounter. And so the idea here is that utilizing waves allows you to introduce more opponents throughout combat to allow your party to have more or lesser of a challenge. If you need the challenge to become greater because your party is just wrecking it and really you only had this and one other encounter planned, you can bring other mobs in. This works especially well with creatures that can be used in waves. What kind of creatures are they? All of them. Here's the fun part. When you're talking about waves in the game, the idea is that you put your players in a situation or the players enter into a situation where other mobs can be introduced. So let's talk about the different ways to actually use waves in combat. Number one, you have an encounter that's designed. Those mobs can do a couple of different things. One, during combat is going way too well for the party. You misjudged. Someone could call for reinforcements. They could blow a horn. They could run off. They could do any of those things. Number one, always allow for the party, if they think quickly and react properly and the dice roll in their favor, stop those reinforcements from calling. It doesn't mean that they're not going to get called because you are in combat. But if someone blows the horn, well, how many rounds do the party have to prepare? You can telegraph those kinds of things. And that's the important thing about reinforcements. Letting the players know about how long it's going to be till those reinforcements arrive. That allows the party to reposition themselves, to plan, to possibly buff, to get ready for those reinforcements. You know how the party just handled all of those mobs, so now you can appropriately plan based upon the difficulty level that you want how those mobs coming in are going to be formatted. What's the ranged people look like? What do the melee people look like? Are they just going to rush them in and such forth? The other way to use mobs and to use waves is the rush. The rush come from things like the flood from Halo, zombies, skeletons, spiders, infected animals, things where coming out of the woods or around corners where they couldn't see these mobs to begin with and then having them rush at the opponents. And so this is done in a couple of ways. Number one, by introducing the mob at a distance, allows them to be able to see coming into combat. You can telegraph how many mobs are going to be entering and about how many turns it is by how many feet away they are. So, a group of 5 zombies rounds the corner and moving at about 30 feet per turn, heading your direction. They're about 120 feet away. Now the party knows what they have to deal with. You've given them enough time where that wizard can lob a fireball and hit all 5 of them. Allow for those things to happen. Allow for your party's strengths to be used on these mobs that are coming in. If they come in a group, let the fireball rain. Why? They're using a resource. If this is your owner encounter, now after that mobs are, comes out and the fire goes off, 3 zombies walk through, still on fire. 2 more zombies come from down the other sides of the streets. I can keep introducing waves until the party has reached the appropriate level of hurt. Now, as a dungeon master, this is a great tool. If the players think you're using this tool, then they can get frustrated. You just kept throwing stuff at us. Now, I have never, in the history of me dungeon mastering in 35 years, ever had any player combat or get angry that I was using waves of combat because of one thing. I would telegraph when the waves were going to stop, or if a player asked me which way looks more safe and they started moving in that direction, I would make sure that the direction they were going was a safe way. I always give my parties the appropriate information to understand the risk at hand, things their characters would know. I don't hide that information behind a skill check unless I want them to roll the dice and possibly send them on the wrong way because I know they can handle it. Or by them rolling a skill check and getting too low, I point them the direction they think is safe. They go because they're role playing and they run into the final group of mobs down there that I have now crafted because they're going in a different direction. That's a new wave of combat. All of these encounters, these different waves, are part of the same combat. In my mind, they are different, meaning I've taken these waves and I have separated them into kind of phases. We'll talk about phases in the next video, though. Waves allow me to keep introducing monsters and telegraph, in fact, changing the difficulty as we go as well. If you can imagine a cave full of goblins, and all of a sudden, one of the goblin blows the horn, and 2 rounds later, a giant ogre comes through with goblins all skittering around it. Now I've introduced a main bad guy, which I can beef up a little bit. I've got the minions because the players are taking out the goblins left and right. And now the players have a new challenge ahead of them that wasn't just goblins because they called for reinforcements. And if the players wiped those first goblins off, that ogre and lots of goblins come up. But let's say that first group didn't quite do a good job and they just kind of got their butts kicked. And so the party's at the low resources, then I'm not going to introduce maybe the ogre. It's just the goblins come through. But if the party cleaned their clocks, used no resources, they're still ready to go, then I can introduce the ogre. Utilizing waves allows you as the dungeon master to adjust on the fly and to adjust at a lower difficulty rating, meaning you introduce lower level monsters that are easy to beat out that the players then can really take down in 1 or 2 shots, but maybe they're utilizing resources to eliminate them because those waves are coming in, and they're afraid that if too many waves come in, because you've already introduced maybe 1 or 2 waves of a couple of monsters, now they're like, okay, we need to get ahead of this, and so they start utilizing resources to get into a better position. You see how this works? As I'm introducing the waves, the players respond in such a way where me as the dungeon master can go, okay, they've had enough. And I don't have to introduce another wave at that moment. So using waves allows you, the dungeon master, to slowly or quickly introduce monsters as necessary, allowing you to adjust that difficulty on the fly. Now, if you use waves all the time, it becomes very ineffective. Another way to think about waves, though, is players being in a situation where they end one encounter and then another encounter is immediately following or telegraphed, right? This is not necessarily a wave, but it's a section. That section has been done, and then the players are moving on to the next section immediately. If they don't move on, then they get that battle that comes in front of them. Those people come anyway. And so if they move forward, then it's in a different environment. By making those changes, what we see is the players can effectively utilize those in waves. And so it allows you as the DM to be able to make those adjustments on the fly, live, without having to actually adjust the difficulty of that encounter. You can do it per wave. The other kind of ways you can do are when things are just rushing towards the players. This is something that works really well because as the DM, if the things are rushing through, it actually allows you to make those adjustments to those mobs that are rushing in. Maybe we need minions. Maybe we need bigger, beefier brutes. We can telegraph the different levels of these mobs as they enter in. Use this on zombies and demons and those kinds of things. Overall, this is simply the idea that in an encounter, we can increase or decrease what our players are actually going up against on the fly. So it's food for thought. And what we'll do is we'll talk about phases, which is a similar concept, but slightly different in the next video. Waves is just a matter of utilizing mobs throughout the same encounter, whether they're telegraphed, whether they enter from a distance, whether they rush in, or whether they're calling for reinforcements. Those are all different ways of using waves that the player can actually see and sense and understand what's going on without feeling like it's just Deus Ex Machina. You don't have to telegraph everything, but you as the dungeon master can play on the fly. So give it a shot and tell me what you think. What questions do you have on how to use waves? We'll try to go into some more detail later on, but I just want you to get the idea that you can do this. And we'll see, guys, and when, as always, we will see you when we will see you next time. And we're going to be talking about phases in the next one, which is a similar concept, but gives you a little bit more flexibility with boss monsters, because that's usually the one that gets the new DMs the most problems. So we'll see you again soon. Bye.